Hey guys, how's it going? Jam here, and welcome to the first proper track build battle of the series. In this episode, I'm going to be racing the HSV Gen F GTS and its pickup truck counterpart, the HSV Maloo. As you can see, we'll be starting with the sort of more normal road car version, the Gen F GTS, and we'll see how it gets on. Now, I've written down lots of notes. I was a little bit ill-informed. I should have made some notes about all the stats and stuff of the car in the last episode. So I've learned from that. So I can tell you that this car is running nearly 600 horsepower, which is quite a lot. I think that's quite a lot more than the Mercedes that we had in episode 1, but I don't think it's quite as much as the Aston that set the benchmark. But yes, it is 587 horsepower and weighing in at 3,400 pounds or thereabouts. Forza reckons it has 5.9 for handling and 6.9 for speed, with 5.8 acceleration and 6.0 braking. So I don't really know what that means for the car at this point in the series, because it's still very early on. And we haven't really got much else to compare it against, especially considering I didn't note down any of this information for the cars that have already gone. The last bit of information that I have written down about the car is that the tyre widths that it's running, it's got 285s on the front and 325s on the rear. Very big rear tyres, as you'd expect from sort of an Aussie coupe, almost muscle car. I'll probably get told off for saying it's a muscle car, but it definitely isn't, but it's that sort of muscle-y car because it's got lots of power. That didn't really make sense, did it? So yes, now I've told you about all the stats of the car as we get onto the first flying lap around the Suzuka West alternate layout. I should probably tell you about how it drives. And as you can see there, going wide in turn 1, this car was surprisingly understeery. I was expecting it to be very leery, sort of quite hard to control. Say all that power, I know it is quite heavy, and it has got big rear tyres, so I'm starting to understand why it didn't behave how I thought it might. Yeah, that does sort of make sense now. But it was very, very composed, and I have to say it was very nice to drive. We were just about hitting 150 miles an hour down the first straight into the first turn, so it's got some decent straight line speed. According to the Forza stats, Forza reckons this is the slower of the two cars in a straight line in today's episode, but it's still faster than the Mercedes from episode 1. So yeah, that's pretty much it. That's a nice, quick rundown of how this car is. Very stable, very... it's not very understeery. It was quite nice to drive. A little bit of understeer. Took a bit of getting used to. And it's mostly through this spoon corner, the last corner on the track. But as I said in the first episode, I think that's more of a characteristic of the corner than the track. So that is the introduction to this car pretty much done. And I'll just let the car cross the line on this first flying lap, and we'll move over to the Ute. So now we move on to the Gen F's pickup truck counterpart, the HSV Maloo. I think the Utes are always quite a fan favourite, and I must say I do tend to prefer Holdens over Fords, so this was quite a nice thing for me to drive, and it does just look fantastic, doesn't it? Especially with the way that rear wing sticks up. The Forza Aero, I like this car quite a bit, as you might be able to tell. So, before we eventually see how the lap times do compare, how does this car compare on paper? And I mean that quite literally. I've got all the stats written down on paper. So, compared to the four-door counterpart, the Ute is supposedly better accelerating, but with slightly lower top speed. And that's according to the Forza stats, where the Ute has 8.6 acceleration to the coupe's... I don't know if it's really a coupe, it's a four-door, isn't it? Anyway, that car has 8.5, so a mere 0.1 better acceleration, but has the same 0.1 deficit in handling. So it's got 8.6 compared to 8.5 acceleration, but it's only got 5.8 compared to 5.9 handling. So we'd expect to see better straight line speed, but slightly worse around the corners perhaps. But once it gets going down to 130R, it's supposedly lacking by 0.4 in the top speed department, with just 6.5 speed compared to the four doors 6.9. And then they both share a 6.0 braking stat. So yeah, Forza's stats for this have typically never been too reliable, so I don't know really how much that's going to matter. On to the more sort of important stats, I suppose. This car is less powerful. It's got 3 less horsepower. That's going to make all the difference. It's got only 584 compared to the four-door's 587. But it is a thousand. No, it's not £1,000 lighter. It's not £1,000 lighter. That would be quite miraculous. It's £100 lighter at £3,300 or thereabouts, compared to the four doors £3,400. And you must say that's probably due to the fact that they just chopped a great big bit off the back of this car. But in driving it, the biggest difference had to be the tyre size. They both cars had 285s on the front. But the four-door, I keep wanting to call it a coupe, the four-door had 3 2.5s on the rear, and this ute only had 2 9.5s, and that really made a difference. This car drove far more how I expected them to both drive. It was just that little bit more leery out the corners. I had to be a little bit more careful when putting the power down, because it's nearly 600 horsepower in these cars, even though they weigh quite a lot. I was expecting it to be easy to spin up the tyres, and in this car it was that bit easier, but it was fun. It didn't seem to have the same understeer as the four-door. As you can see there, going into spoon, a little bit of a kick of oversteer actually, so this was definitely more interesting to drive. But being less stable, less planted, less grippy, does that mean it's going to be faster or not? Well, let's go and find out. So here we are with both cars on the best flying lap that I managed within the 5 given with either car. Heading down into the first turn, looking remarkably closely matched, as you'd expect at this early stage, considering they are basically the same car in 2 different body shells. Braking into turn 1, taking slightly different lines with each. The ute liked to attack the apex a little bit more, whereas the four-door like to take a bit more of a wider, more controlled line, and you can see that in their behaviour coming out the corner. The Maloo there getting quite a kick of oversteer and then using a lot less curb through the first Degner. And on the exit, it's using a lot more curb because it didn't quite get turned in to use the entry curb. Coming up now to the very tight hairpin, and it looks like the four-door HSV GTS Gen F, or whatever it's called. It's got a long confusing name with lots of acronyms. HSV Gen F GTS. I think that's the one. Looks to be pulling ahead, and I've now completely missed out the fact that both of them get a little bit of a kick of wheel spin on the exit of the alternate chicane. Now flying down into the last corner, a double-handed, or the double apex, long left hand at spoon, and it does still look as though that the Gen F is still marginally ahead. And through a long corner like this, you'd expect it to only increase its margin with just that fractionally better handling. The Maloo, with supposedly better acceleration, gets a nice tight line out of the final corner. Can it drag it up to the line though? No, it can't. The Gen F beats it to the line and presumably sets a faster lap. So let's go and look and see how they managed. The Gen F put in a lap time of 1 minute 26.856, putting it in second place, just over half a tenth behind the leader. The Maloo wasn't quite as quick, but it does go into third place, beating the Mercedes-Benz from episode 1 with a 1 minute 27.0. So that's it. That's the end of this episode. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you soon for the next one. Until then, goodbye.